Hello.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Azure User Group Sweden, our session for today. Hi, Håkan.
Hello, Jonah. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. I hope the audience are having a great time today at home or wherever you are. Happy weekend. Yes.
Yep. So what are we going to see today, Jonah?
Today, we will have a special guest. We will have a topic, a session about Azure Monitor. And we will have with us Rickard with us. You can tell us more about Rickard, Håkan.
Yeah, I think, but first, before we dive into that, we will just go through our code of conduct here. So basically, our code of conduct is we should be nice and friendly, and we should listen with purpose and be thoughtful, and we also should be respectful to each other. And we should seek to understand and not criticize, and be curious and open to share ideas. We should also be inclusive in our comments and our questions. So you can see our written code of conduct on this URL over here, and you can also follow us on the meetup page to get notified when we have our next events. So with that said, I think we can welcome Rickard into our stream.
Hello there.
Hi.
Hi. How are you?
We're doing great. I like your background. You're also from Sweden. I know. A fellow Microsoft Azure MVP in Sweden. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm I love Azure and love Legos also, especially pirate ships. As you can see, it's a sort of a childhood dream when I was a kid to have many pirate ships, and now when I'm old and have my own money, I've spent quite a few money on pirate ships. So yeah.
Yes.
We could see here in your background that you're organizer of Svenuggen.net user group Örebro. Can you say a couple of words about that? What is it? What is Svenuggen.net user group?
Yeah. So Svenug is Sweden.net user group, and we try to have events around different .NET topics and development in sort of in general, and a lot of cloud stuff also. So just other week we had a IT security for developers with Johan Lindfors from TrueSec, for example. And in a couple of weeks we have a session about Azure Sweden, or the new Azure data center in Sweden, with some Microsoft Roger Morell, data center lead in Sweden. So yeah, we try to have sessions that seems interesting, sort of for the time being. We also have a Dapper session scheduled later in this fall. So check that out, Svenug Örebro on Meetup.
Oh, wait. So is it both physical events and virtual events?
Yeah, so before, a couple of years ago, or maybe 2 years ago, before COVID, there was mostly live events. But now we have started to running virtual events, and we usually do them around lunchtime, sort of on a regular weekday, so people can join in on their lunches. So we'll see in the future if we will have both or continue with virtual. We haven't really discussed that yet. Of course, we get a lot more people when we have it during the day and virtual, because people won't have to sort of go to the venue. But yeah, pros and cons.
Yes. I hope to join one of your sessions since I'm also in Sweden. I just need to go south and join online sometimes. It sounds like you have great sessions. So we can share about the link about Svenug later if you could do that in the chat as well.
Of course.
Yes. Yeah.
Then I think we just leave the stage over to you, Rickard. Best of luck.
Thank you. So welcome to this session. Become an Azure Troubleshoot Rockstar with Azure Monitor. And to be honest, we only have an hour, but hopefully we can at least be, maybe not rock stars, but you will at least get an overview on what Azure Monitor is and sort of which parts of it you can use that makes sense to you. So the goals with this presentation is an intro of Azure Monitor, showcase some Azure Monitor features. Azure Monitor is pretty big and many features and services underneath that Azure Monitor umbrella. And I'd like to tell you sort of why I think Azure Monitor is great and why you should use it. And also, I've used it for a lot of time, maybe even more than 5 years, and there's a lot of stuff you learn on the way when using it. So I would like to give you some tips about that. A little bit about me. I'm a cloud solution architect and owner of O3H Consulting. I worked in most businesses, financial, insurance, government, and startups. Worked with Azure and Azure Stack for about 10 years. I started off as a .NET developer, but after a while, I felt that we as developers sort of were pushed back by security and infra, and we couldn't deliver the value that we wanted in the speed that we wanted. So I got more and more interested in sort of automation and infra automation and test automation and all that. And that's when I started to get interested in infrastructure as code and cloud platforms and all that. So what I try to do today is to help developers to use sort of the monitor and infra and security tools in Azure in a better way. I helped a lot of organizations to sort of implement their monitoring strategy. And I'm a big believer in sort of, if you build the application, you should run the application and you should monitor your application, because it's sort of only the ones that has built up the application that really understands it. And you need to understand your application to be able to monitor it. And I'm also a fan of PaaS and serverless. I think you should go as high up in the stack as you can to be able to focus on delivering business value instead of infrastructure and stuff like that. I'm also a lover of Azure, as you might have suspected, and also Legos, as you can see behind me here, as we talked about before. So yeah, enough about me. Why should you even do monitoring? So most people might think that it's just a reactive thing. It's your app goes down and then you should sort of heal it and then you're done with it. But to me, it's a lot more. You can actually almost see into the future if you have the right monitoring tool. You can sort of see trends, and sort of you can see that, okay, my performance is lacking a little bit, and you can sort of get notified about that before your customer starts seeing the issue. So you can sort of see into the future a little bit. And you can also solve issues a lot faster if they appear, if you have good insights. And probably you should even have monitor before production in your dev and test environments to be able to find bugs and performance issues or whatever before they even reach production. I've seen so many cases where customers have production issues that should have been seen in dev and test if they have had the right monitoring tools and had the right sort of culture and organization and processes around monitoring. And I will give you some pointers on that later on. It's also a great way to lower your costs because you get to know a lot about your infrastructure and see how your infrastructure behaves. And that means that you can sort of scale down or scale up or whatever. It's also a great way to find security breaches. If someone is hacking your application or trying to hack your application. you can take data-driven decisions, both from a technical perspective, but also from a business perspective. So in the end, this is to make your users more happy, but there's a lot of different ways you can use monitoring tools, and especially Azure Monitor, to make your users more happy. So a question I get quite often is, what's the difference between Azure Security Center, Azure Sentinel, and Azure Monitor? So Security Center, that's a security management system. It does threat analysis with Azure Defender, for example, for specific Azure resources. Provides security recommendations and compliance using Azure Policy. Sentinel is a CM system, Security Information Event Management System. That's a service to deep dive into security issues and to monitor your logs from a security perspective. And there's a lot of sort of automations you can do here with logic apps and playbooks to sort of mitigate issues and find issues that aren't as they should be. And Azure Monitor, on the other hand, that's what we're going to talk about today. It's an operations monitoring suite of tools and services. And we will go through what that is. So these systems, they complement each other. So you should use all of them. So it's not that they sort of do each other's work or something like that. But from an sort of operations perspective, we will talk about Azure Monitor today. So there's been quite a lot of change in monitoring, or at least in some organizations. Sort of traditional monitoring was that developers monitored their apps, IT operations monitored infrastructure, and network admins monitored network. But today, when you use PaaS and serverless services, sort of all these needs to be mended together, and you need to have insights of everything at once. So sort of modern monitoring across apps, infra, and network, you can use Azure Monitor for that to sort of get an overall look on both your app, infra, and network to actually find the error faster. So some scenarios where you use Azure Monitor. You can use it to detect and diagnose issues across apps and sort of apps you integrate with. Here you can see a print screen of my almost favorite service in Azure, I'd say. It's the application map in Application Insights. And it sort of shows each instance of your application here and how they communicate with each other. So this is a web application communicating with a backend application, and it then talks to a event hub here, I think, and here we have probably some VM or something like that. So we can see how the calls are doing and all that. We will talk about, I will demo this one later. You can correlate issues on different levels in your application infra and network. So this is a print screen of Container Insights, where you can see how your pods are doing. So you can sort of both use App Insights and Container Insights and a specific service for just the service, the specific monitoring service for the service that you're using. You can use alerts which are valid or sort of aggregated within your whole tenant and organization. So if you have a big organization which has different applications that are dependent upon each other, you can see if other teams have alerts or problems in their production environment. So you can sort of see your alerts at scale. And when you want to go sort of full Rockstar, you can drill down into log analytics and actually look at the logs. And this is sort of the heart of Azure Monitor. That's log analytics. That's sort of where most of the data end up, and the different monitoring tools use that data to visualize it in a more user-friendly way. And you can use dashboards or Azure Monitor workbooks. I will show this later, but you can sort of use the data from the previous step to visualize it in a nice and user-friendly way. So how does Azure Monitor really work then? So you have an application, or you have some infrastructure like a virtual machine. Doesn't matter if it's running in Azure or not. You can have some sort of logs from the Azure platform, like activity logs, audit logs, like that. Or you can even have custom sources where you sort of just send in a REST. It's a REST-based API where you can send in logs. So all this sort of all this data, no matter where it comes from, either ends up in log analytics or in the metric store. And the metric store is sort of time-based data, for example, performance counters. And logs are more application-specific or infrastructure service-specific rows. For example, an exception or a request or something like that. This data, you can then use Azure Monitor Insights, which have a lot of different services that sort of understands the specific service. For example, application insights, container insights, VM insights, network insights. And it helps you to sort of troubleshoot your error there. So usually you start with looking at app insights and you sort of drill down from there, and maybe it's a network issue, you jump to network insights, or maybe it's a VM issue, then you jump to your VM, or if you're running a container-based workload, you jump to the container insights tool. And you can also visualize or create your own visualizations, as I mentioned, with dashboards or workbooks. And you can go and analyze this data, this raw data, if you want to. And you can respond on this data with alerts and action groups. And you can even send all this data to other monitoring tools if you wanted to. For example, to Splunk, for example, if you're using that, you can send all the events that Azure Monitor collects and send them to other monitoring tools if you want to do that. So what parts of Azure Monitor is used to gather the data? So sort of from an application perspective, it's an SDK most usually that's used, sort of a .NET SDK or Java SDK or something like that collects application data. For infrastructure, meaning VMs or Kubernetes clusters or AKS and stuff like that, it's usually agents that run on the cluster or the VM that collects the data and sends it to Azure Monitor. And for Azure resources, it's zero instrumentation. It just works sort of. It's handled by Azure, but it sends the data to your Azure Monitor instances also. And Azure Monitor also has a REST API where you can send in whatever data you need. I have customers that sort of send business data to Log Analytics and then visualizes it with workbooks, for example. So how would you monitor sort of full stack then? Let's take, for example, you have an application that uses PaaS and serverless and containers. So for application workload monitoring, you would use the SDKs, and it doesn't really matter with which programming language you're using for your application. It actually supports most of the application languages that exists. And there's also a new standard coming for this called Open Telemetry, which is a cloud native compute foundation standard that's sort of standard for tracing data that supports almost any programming language, and application insights can pick this up and visualize it. For container infrastructure monitor, that would be container insights. We'll show you this a little bit later. So if we take a look at an application, sort of a sample modern application, we have some PaaS services here. We have a microservice application here running in AKS with pods that run different programming languages, different stacks. And we have some databases and storage. And then we also have some VMs here. So how would you then, which parts of Azure Monitor would you use to monitor these? You would use Azure Monitor Application Insights to monitor these PaaS services. You would use Container Insights and App Insights for the container cluster. And for databases and storage, there are more specific tools like Cosmos DB Insights and Storage Insights, and even SQL Insights. It's a new feature, new service that's coming. And for VMs, you would use VM Insights, which is agent-based. So now I wanted to show you a little bit what Azure Monitor looks like in the Azure Portal. So let's jump to the portal. And if I go here and click Azure Monitor, I'm presented with all the Azure Monitor services that exists in Azure. These are sort of, this is application insights, VM insights, storage accounts, and all that. And here we can see all the application insights that I have, that are sort of my applications that are instrumented with application insights. Here I can see VM insights. I don't really have any VMs that are monitored right now. So there's a lot of different services here, and I will talk through some of these in the next demo. So when something happens in your application, you let's say, for example, your performance is getting worse or something like that. You want to be alerted about this, or even maybe do some mitigation automatically. So this is a demo where I explain alerts. in the Azure Monitor blade, under alerts, we can see all the alerts in this subscription right now. We could see all the alerts for our whole tenant here if we wanted to, so you can really see all the alerts in one blade for your whole organization, which can be really useful if you have a big incident, for example, and you can see in which systems or infrastructure resources do we have alerts right now. An alert can have 4 different severities, 0 to 4. 0 is the most critical one, of course. An alert can also have one of 3 states: new, acknowledged, and closed. New is if it's been fired, and if you have started working on it and sort of trying to solve it, then you would change the state to acknowledged. And when you're done with it, you change it to closed. Now I wanted to create an alert rule. So we go here and click New Alert Rule. So first off, Azure Monitor is asking us for the scope. And the scope is most likely a resource. So what we want to do now is, if we have an app service plan that has a high CPU, we want an alert on that. So the resource we want to add an alert on is app service plans. Let's choose this one, Windows, and click Done. What conditions should be met in order to trigger this alert? So we go to Add Condition. Let's choose CPU percentage. We are presented with the CPU for this app service plan the last 6 hours. Here we can choose static or dynamic. Dynamic is it looks at the history of the CPU percentage and tries to evaluate if it should trigger an alert or not. But today we want a static threshold. So let's say whenever the threshold is greater than 60%, we get a text here. Whenever the average CPU percentage is greater than 60%, then we should trigger this alert. We can also scroll up here and see sort of a visual over the 60% here. We also see that it will be evaluated every 1 minute, and the aggregation will be 5 minutes. So we click Done here. So now we've said that, okay, the resource, we want to check it for CPU percentage, then we want to trigger the alert. But what should we do when the alert is triggered? Should we email someone? Should we kick off some automated flow, or should we post something to Teams or something like that? That's what you do in an action group. So you could have created action groups already and use them for a lot of other alerts, but let's create a new one here. So first off, you choose a resource group, and let's call this Zero Sales Action Group. And notifications, who should be notified. You could email someone, SMS, or push a voice, or we could email the resource manager role here. So let's do that. Let's email the owner when this happens. Next up is the actions. This is if we want something other than notifications to happen when this alert is triggered. So here we could, for example, kick off an automation runbook or an Azure function, post something to an ITSM, for example, ServiceNow or something like that, or trigger a webhook or logic app or whatever. So for example, in this case, you might want to, for example, scale your app service using an Azure function, for example. But in this case, it wouldn't be necessary since that functionality already is in app service. So I let your imaginations decide what you want to do here. So I skip this one. We will we are okay with only the notifications. And then we click review, create, and then create. The action group is created for us. And we just specify a name here. CPU high on app service plan. And we choose the severity. Maybe it's a warning. And if we automatically want to resolve it, meaning that when the value is under the threshold, it could be resolved automatically. And we create the alert rule. Yeah. So next demo is a sort of sales demo application, which I just used to showcase some parts of Azure Monitor. I just want to give you an intro of the application, sort of. And a lot of these demos are focused around the application map in Application Insights. So I've always been a fan of maps, even the pirate map here. And as I said before, I can't stop talking about the app map in Application Insights. It's really, really great. So if it's one thing you should take away from this talk, it's that one. So this is a print screen of the application map of the application. Here we see that we have an availability test, which is a function that exists in Application Insights. Here we have a front-end application. This is a back-end application. And this is another backend application running on AKS. And here we see a database. We can also see sort of the latency that we have towards these different services here and here, for example, and how many calls we have. And this is for the last hour then. So this one is hosted on app service, and then AKS. And this one is an Azure SQL one. So there's something wrong with this application. The app is down, and I'll try to sort of walk you through a troubleshooting scenario on how you could use different Azure Monitor tools to find out what's wrong. We're getting calls and emails from our customers that our application is down. If we go into alerts here and choose past hour, we can see that we actually have an alert here. So let's take a look at this one. It seems to be our Application Insights resource, and more specific, it seems to be the availability tests that exists within this resource that has been failing. So let's take a look at those. And we can see here that if we change the past last 30 minutes again, we can see that we had a test that were going okay here, but somewhere around here we started getting failures. So something is not well here. We have 14 failures and 16 success for the last 30 minutes. And we're also failing from a number of different places in the world. So let's try to find out what's wrong here. We can click failed here. Then we can sort by date and click this one. We're now entering another part of Application Insights to view the end-to-end transaction details. And here we can see the availability test. And here we can see a little bit of a troubleshooting report. You can see that a number of things went well, but we're getting an internal server error 500 from the front-end application, and that does not match the 200 OK that we are expecting. We don't have any SSL certificate problems. That's good. So if you click the next one here, we're seeing the same thing, 500. If we click the backend application here, we can see that we have a 403 here. And that's usually forbidden, and sort of knowing app services, this could be a number of different causes, but most probably we have something wrong in this sales backend application. So usually here I go back to Application Insights and take a look at the application map. And as we saw, we have the front-end application and something is going wrong with the calls to the sales backend. And usually, or sort of the fastest troubleshooting here is that I want to know what has changed in Azure or within my application or within my infrastructure resources. And then there's an excellent application or service for this in Azure that's called change analysis, application change analysis. Application change analysis shows changes that has happened in Azure on an ARM level through the resource graph, but it also is even more intelligent than that. For example, there are you can see even deeper changes within app service changes, for example, and some other resources. So now we want to see what has changed with my application for the last hour. And I know that all the infrastructure resources for my application is in a specific resource group. So let's filter that. And what we can see here is that something has changed a couple of minutes ago. And the old value was running and the new value was stopped. And it's in the sales backend web app. So if we click here, we can see that the state of the web app was running and then it was stopped. So someone stopped the application or something stopped the application. And this could it be done through Azure PowerShell or a pipeline or through the portal. And we can even see here who changed, which user that changed this or stopped the application. So clumsy developer, a team member of mine, probably went in and thought he was stopping the test environment or something like that, but instead he stopped production. So this is an excellent way to actually find out what has changed since everything worked fine. And we'll give you a quick overview of that, have someone deployed the new code, for example, or changed some infrastructure settings. And you can even see all the changes that have happened within your subscription or your whole tenant. So this is super useful for troubleshooting. Yeah, so let's do another demo. Last time the app was down, now it's slow. And this one will showcase Azure Alerts, Container Insights, and App Insights. Once again, we're getting information that our system is slow or not working. And we jump into alerts. And we can see here for the past 30 minutes, we have an alert here. Let's take a look here, where we have an alert fired that container CPU usage is high. Okay, so it seems that some pod in our AKS cluster is having too much to do or having a high CPU load. So as always, I first go to Application Insights and take a look there, since the pods there are reporting to the same Application Insights. You can see right away here that our response time has increased quite a lot for our application. Let's go to App Map and check the last 30 minutes. We can see here that this is our sales customer application. This is the application that's running in AKS, and these two are running in App Service. And you can see here that we have 2 seconds here and 2 seconds there. Okay, gives us some information. Then we go and take a look at performance for the last 30 minutes. You can see that we have had a lot of spikes here from almost just a few milliseconds up to 10 seconds, 13 seconds, and then up again to 20 seconds. So we clearly have something going wrong here. And it's get sales, get home sales, and get customer that's acting up. Okay. And we knew that we had the CPU at one high on the AKS cluster. And these are all calls that end up in this call. So, okay, let's go and take a look at the AKS cluster. And now we can jump into Container Insights, which is sort of the application insights, but for the AKS cluster. And here we can see the node CPU utilization. This is sort of the VMs that are running the AKS cluster. We can see that we have had a spike here. So that tells us something. But of course, there are other workloads running in the cluster right now. Okay. So we can go to controllers and see how our specific application is doing for the time being. But first, let's change to last 30 minutes. Go to controllers. Okay, and we can see here that our O3H sales customer, that's our pod. It's running at 100% CPU, so we can see here and here. And we just have one pod running here. We can click View Live Data here to be certain on what's going on right now. Then Live Metrics, and then we can get sort of a live data here. And we can see here that the limit for this pod is 500 millicores. And it's actually running at that right now. The memory seems fine because it has a 500 limit, but the CPU is maxed. So, okay. And knowing this application, this pod should actually scale out, or the replica set should scale out using the HPA for this pod. So why isn't it scaling out? Most probably we have some misconfiguration. So let's try to scale this pod or this replica set and see what's going to happen. So let's connect to Cloud Shell and tell our horizontal pod autoscaler that we want to scale or set the max replicas to 20 instead of 1, it seems to be now, since it hasn't scaled anything. So you can see here we only have 1. So let's do that. Let's see what happens. So now if you go to workloads, we should see that our application is scaling up. We can see here, now we're already at 4 pods here. Should have happened just, 15 seconds ago when we ran the command. So this is looking good, and we should see a performance increase here now since we're scaling up. So let's go and take a look in Application Insights again. We can see that server requests are quite high, but our response time is going down, or has gone down. That's good. Let's take a look at performance just to be. Let's do the last hour. We can see here that these are the spikes that we had, and it's going down all the same. So that's good. Everything seems to be working now. Yeah, so that was a couple of demos showcasing different kinds of monitoring tools in Azure Monitor. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about Azure Workbooks or Azure Monitor Workbooks, which actually are they are sort of specialized or interactive reports which have several different data sources within Azure. So for example, if you're using Cosmos DB Insights or SQL Insights or App Insights, you're actually using workbooks that someone else has written for you. But you can create these workbooks on your own. So you can sort of almost build your own Azure Portal UI, sort of, because it has a lot of different data sources which you can read from and sort of visualize So you can go to logs, for example, that's the log analytics data, metrics, resource graph data, the change analysis. You can just have custom JSON, do HTTP calls, do ARM calls, view Azure Health. So what I try to do, sort of learn to my customers, is to create workbooks that sort of illustrate their whole application from an end-to-end perspective. It sort of shows everything that has changed within that resource group. It shows the logs for each specific resource, no matter if your application is built on VMs or runs on VMs or on PaaS services or whatever, or both. You can sort of have a troubleshooting workbook that helps you sort of find errors faster. And there also are some examples of this within Application Insights. If you go to troubleshooting guides, you can use the workbooks that are created there and then edit them and sort of make them the way you like them to fit your application. It's a really good way to do that. So I'm going to jump to some learnings after having worked with Azure Monitor or monitoring in general for quite some time. So it's really important that your organization have a monitoring culture, that it's important to monitor. Your teams should feel responsible for monitoring their application, and your organization should allow you to get the time to do that. You should monitor your monitoring costs. There are features for this in Azure Monitor to check sort of how much you spend on log analytics and App Insights, for example. Monitor all your environments, because then you will find errors or bugs before they reach production. And as I said before, you build it, you run it, you monitor it. And this also has to do with the mindset and culture of your organization, that your organization needs to be structured in a way to allow you to monitor your application and get access to the data that you need. One thing I tell my customers is to create sort of a monitoring dashboard, either an Azure Portal dashboard or a workbook, as I talked about before, that sort of showcases the data that's important for your application, and go through that workbook every morning on your sort of daily stand up or whatever, your morning meetings, and get your whole team involved in the monitoring and get them to understand the data and understand your application. And here you can, for example, visualize the costs for your application, errors, performance, whatever. So this is really important to do, I'd say. And then you sort of, when a new error sort of appears in production, you think about, okay, how could I have seen this earlier? And then you add an alert or add some logging or whatever, and then you visualize that in your workbook also. So you can find it even faster the next time it appears. And as I've said several times here, app map and workbooks are great. It's really important to, an error appears, you need to find out what's wrong. These are the sort of visualization tools that will help you find out where to look next. And then you drill down, sort of use the insights for the specific service, and maybe later on you sort of do sort of custom queries in log analytics or metrics or whatever, but start with app map and workbooks and find out what's wrong. access model for the monitoring data or for log analytics is also important. So you can give the ones that need the data, you can give them the access. And that's also important that you don't log information, sort of, for example, GDPR information or something like that, that sort of keeps your dev teams from accessing the monitoring data. You need to think about this. And this, again, has to do with the organization and mindset and culture thing. So access model needs to be right. You need to log the stuff that you need and that you can share to everyone. And you shouldn't log too much either, because then it's too expensive. So it's kind of a slippery slope there. Okay, so that's it for me. Don't forget to check out all the treasures in Azure Monitor. I didn't have time to showcase all of them, of course. We'll probably need a week or two to do that, but hopefully you're getting an intro on some of the tools and how you could use them. So thanks for me.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rickard. It was very great session and demos. Yeah, I learned a lot. And we also have lots of questions from our audience.
Great.
Show. Yeah, and including Håkan and I, actually. It's very interesting, including the audience. Let's see. Let's start with the first question from Gabriel. In your experience, do you see any limitation of Azure Monitor service?
Well, of course, there are always pros and cons with different monitoring tools. I'd say one of the limitations could be, if we take it from an application perspective, it's that if you use application insights, for example, to instrument your apps, it doesn't support all of the programming languages. For example, Go and Elixir and or Erlang and some of those languages. But there are an initiative going on there called Open Telemetry, where you can use, as I said, maybe a bit quick, but it's sort of a standard for tracing or monitoring data, and that means that everyone that complies to that standard, the Open Telemetry standard, you can use whatever SDK for that, and there are Open Telemetry SDKs for Go and other languages. So that means that you can use SDKs that are written by someone else, and App Insights will understand them. So that's sort of one con that wasn't great before, but it's really great now, or well, in a while at least, when it's implemented fully. But that was one of the sort of cons before. More limitations. Well, not really. I mean, the reason why I really like Azure Monitor is, if you're deep into Azure and you need your sort of the majority of your services are in Azure, Azure Monitor is the monitoring service that understands your Azure resources the best, because the Azure Monitor teams in Redmond, they work together with the teams that develop functions and app service and whatever. So I mean, it's kind of hard for the other monitoring tools to have the same insight and integration that Azure Monitor has. But if you are in other clouds, or you're deep in other clouds, that there might be other tools that fit better there. But Azure Monitor supports those also. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Should we take another question from Gabriel, or should we take Håkan's question?
We can take the next question here from Gabriel. He said, what feature would you love to see added to Azure Monitor in the future?
Yeah, so for me, it's I had a topic there on the access model, sort of that it's kind of hard sometimes to share data with teams if you have logged a little bit too much data, and it's also sort of a privacy concern there. So something around that sort of more granular access model somehow. There is a pretty good one right now, but it's still sort of a problem, I'd say. But I haven't seen any other implementation of it that it's better. It's just a general concern that I see at my customer that, okay, we want to give them this data, but it's hard because we also log this to the same data store. So yeah, that's kind of hard. Is there anything else I'd like to see? Yeah, of course. I think that the open telemetry thing is really great. I think that should be implemented for the whole of Azure Monitor. So you actually that means that an app that has nothing to do with sort of your it's a Go app that just can send data to application insights, and then application insights can visualize everything just because it's a standard. Because now the metric and log standard, that's sort of Microsoft specific, but OpenTelemetry sort of fixes that. So I think that's a great thing that I hope that Azure Monitor team will implement even more in Azure Monitor in the future. And I think they are.
All right. Thank you. Should we take the other audience before we take Håkan's and Jonas? We have a question from Marion Espino. Prior to standard logic app, what is your recommendation to put or include it up even within the app insights?
Prior to standard, what is your recommendation to put included? So you mean visualize? I'm not sure if so. Yeah. So for a logic app, I'm not sure if I understand the question, but I'll try to answer it. Yes. For a logic app, you would have to log directly to Log Analytics to get sort of error logs and stuff like that. I don't think there is I might be wrong, but I don't think that there is a sort of a native experience to send app insights, send logic apps data to app insights if you don't do it on your own in sort of inside the logic app. Yeah. But Marion, please, if I misunderstood the question, please write again and I'll try to answer it.
Yeah, I have Marion as a contact on LinkedIn, so I think I will ask and clarify if your answer answered this question. Yeah. Yes. Should we take Håkan's question this time? Varsågod, Håkan.
Thank you. Yeah, so I was asking, this application change analysis, is it still in preview? And if it is, should we be concerned using it in production?
Yeah, so I believe it's still in preview, but I don't think it's you don't have to be worried about using it in production because it reads from the Azure Resource Graph and sort of sees the changes from there. So it doesn't do anything with sort of your running application. So yeah, it's not, you don't have to be concerned with sort of it messing with your application. So I think you could use it in production just for troubleshooting, for example. That's at least my view. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yes. Can I ask my last question? Yeah. Is it possible to implement Azure Monitor in an application that is on-premise servers? If so, how?
Yeah. So yeah, it's for example, if you have a .NET application, it's you instrument it with application insights the same way, no matter where it runs. So you just import a NuGet package, and it sort of injects in your application and sends the tracing and the telemetry data to application insights. So it doesn't matter if it's running in Azure on-prem or in Amazon or in GCP. It just sends the data. So that's perfectly possible. And I have customers that sort of have front-end applications running in Azure, and they have a back-end application like Workers or Windows Communication Foundation Services or whatever on-prem, and they report to the same application insights instance in Azure, and they can see in the app map, as I showed you, there's sort of one circle for the Azure app and one circle for the on-premise app. So that works perfectly well. And you can even, if you want to, you can install an App Insights agent on a virtual machine that's running IIS-based applications, and it auto-instruments your applications running on the on-premise server. And if you want to sort of use VM Insights or the more infrastructure-based monitoring services, you can install the Log Analytics or Azure Monitor agent on those virtual machines, and it will start collecting the data and send it to Log Analytics also. So then you can use VM Insights.
All right.
And also it's actually the same for Container Insights also. You can monitor your Kubernetes clusters in whatever cloud or on-premise if you wanted to.
Yes.
So
those are great advice and tips, because I'm working on a project in which we are moving to the cloud, but we need to monitor what's going on on the on-premise. So it's good to monitor it and analyze. Thank you so much for the answer to my question. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to spin off what you just said there is, when I help customers migrating to Azure, I always say that let's add application insights before we migrate, because we need to learn how your application is behaving on-premise. And if you have the monitoring data from on-premise with App Insights, and then you migrate your application, you can then sort of compare the performance data when it ran in Azure and when it ran on-prem, and you can see which different services it talked to on-prem and all that. So it's a great tool to use on-prem also.
Yes, that's great. Yeah, thank you. All right, we're out of time. Thank you so much, everyone, for all the questions and the very great session that we had with Rickard. Thank you so much, Rickard. It was great insights.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Yes.
And for everyone who has been watching now or is watching this on YouTube, just connect with us on Twitter or on Meetup or on LinkedIn so that you can get updated when we have our next session. So I think with that, we will just wish you a happy Saturday.
Yeah, happy weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.
Same to you.
See you next time. Bye.